A young black schoolgirl, Jasmine, is unfairly treated by a hotel manager who assumes she doesn't belong. When her mother, the hotel owner, arrives and reveals her identity, the manager's attitude changes drastically. Jasmine's experience teaches her the power of standing up for herself, while her mother takes action to hold the manager accountable and implement changes in the hotel. The story explores themes of justice, empowerment, and fighting against prejudice. When a millionaire's luxury car was scratched by a poor girl, he thought it was the end of the world. What happened next will shock you. You won't believe how a simple accident turned into a life-changing event for both of them. It seemed like a small mistake at first. But little did the millionaire know, the girl was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping, real-life stories. This story explores themes of power, judgment, and how life can change in the blink of an eye. Stay tuned for a shocking twist. Sophie Green, an 18-year-old high school senior, walks down a bustling city street, her worn sneakers tapping against the pavement. Her appearance is modest but neat, faded jacket, jeans, and a messy bun holding back her unruly hair. She carries a heavy backpack with a notebook peeking out, clearly a student balancing her schoolwork with a part-time job. Sophie's life hasn't been easy. Raised by her single mother, she's learned to navigate the world with grit and determination, despite the financial hardships they face. Every day is a challenge, but she has a dream: college. And she's determined to make it happen, even if the odds are stacked against her. Sophie is used to being overlooked, judged by her appearance and her financial status. She's often reminded that people like her don't belong in places of luxury, but she never lets that define her. She works hard, respects others, and dreams of a better future, even when the world around her doesn't seem to have space for someone like her. Richard Hampton, on the other hand, embodies the opposite of everything Sophie represents. In his mid-40s, Richard stands tall with a sharp suit, neatly combed hair, and a self-assured smirk that speaks volumes of his arrogance. As an entrepreneur, Richard has built his success on the strength of his wealth, and he wears his privilege like a badge of honor. His new luxury car gleams in the sunlight as he parks it outside a fancy cafe, clearly marking his status in the world. To him, money and success define a person's worth, and he feels entitled to make judgments about those who don't meet his standards. As Sophie walks through this upscale district, she can't help but feel out of place. The elegant shops and expensive restaurants seem like another world, one she's only dreamed of being a part of. She's on her way to her second job, trying to juggle work, school, and the looming pressure of applying to colleges. Little does she know, today's routine walk will take a turn that will forever change her life. The contrast between Sophie's world and Richard's is striking. Sophie walks past boutiques filled with designer clothing and luxury cars parked along the street. Her worn shoes stand out against the polished luxury of the environment. She walks with purpose, but there's a quiet unease, knowing she doesn't quite belong in this world of affluence. As Sophie approaches a fancy cafe, she accidentally bumps into Richard's parked car. The sound of her backpack grazing the side of the car breaks through the quiet of the street. She's startled, looking down at the scratch she's made, her heart racing. Richard, who had just exited the cafe, notices the sound and turns toward her with an annoyed expression. The tension in the air is palpable as their worlds collide, setting the stage for a confrontation neither of them expected. Sophie hurriedly navigated the crowded street, her mind on getting to her second job to meet her mother. Her backpack swung as she walked, brushing against the sleek, shiny luxury car parked at the side of the cafe. The soft scrape of her bag against the polished surface was faint, but it was enough to leave a small scratch along the side of the car. She immediately froze, her heart racing at the realization of what had happened. Before she could even process the situation, Richard Hampton emerged from the cafe, his sharp suit contrasting against the hustle and bustle of the street. He noticed the sound and looked up, his gaze narrowing as he saw the small scratch on the car. "Excuse me," he barked, his voice filled with anger. Sophie, startled, turned to face him. "Did you just scratch my car?" "I'm so sorry," Sophie immediately apologized, her voice trembling. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to. You think this is a joke?" Richard cut her off, his voice rising in volume. He stepped closer, inspecting the scratch like it was the most devastating thing he'd ever seen. "Do you have any idea how much this car is worth? And now, you're wasting my time." Sophie's heart pounded. I didn't mean to, really. I'm sorry. It was just an accident." But Richard wasn't listening. His face turned red with fury as he crossed his arms, glaring at Sophie. "You think I'm just going to let this slide? I'm not dealing with someone like you making a mess of my property. You're going to pay for the damage." "I don't have any money," Sophie said quietly, trying to explain. "I don't." "Of course you don't," Richard scoffed. "Figures. You think you can get away with anything just because you're in this part of town, huh? Let me tell you something. You're going to pay for this or I'm calling the police." The words hit Sophie like a punch to the gut. She looked around, her face flushed with embarrassment, but there was no one willing to help. The few passers-by glanced over, but most kept walking. Some exchanged uneasy glances, while others whispered, too afraid to get involved in a confrontation with someone like Richard. One young woman, standing on the other side of the street, muttered to her friend, "This guy thinks he owns everything." Sophie stood her ground, despite the shame burning in her chest. "Please, I didn't mean to." Richard ignored her, still seething. He pulled out his phone and began dialing. "I don't care. You're going to pay for this, or the cops will. Handle it. You can't just walk around causing damage and expect nothing to happen." The more Richard shouted, the more Sophie felt like the world around her was closing in. She felt small, insignificant in this moment, like the eyes of the whole city were on her, waiting for her to back down. Her throat tightened, but she refused to let the humiliation show. As Richard continued his tirade, Sophie's mind raced. Her mother was on her way. She had to call her. Sophie reached for her phone and dialed, her fingers shaking as she held it to her ear. "Mom, something's happened," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you come down here?" The call ended, and Sophie stood still, trying to steady her breath. Richard, still angrily on the phone with the police, hadn't noticed her reaching out for help. As the tension thickened, all she could do was wait, hoping her mother would get there in time to fix this, unsure of how the situation would end. The scene froze in that moment. Would Sophie's mother arrive in time to stop this confrontation from escalating further? The silence was deafening, and the audience was left wondering how much more could unfold. Sophie stood silently beside the scratched luxury car, her heart racing. Richard, still talking loudly into his phone, was too focused on his own indignation to notice her mother approaching. The hum of the city's busy street was replaced by the soft tap of Olivia Green's heels as she walked towards the scene. Olivia's posture was straight, and she moved with purpose, exuding calm authority. She was a woman in her 40s, impeccably dressed in a well-tailored suit that perfectly matched her poised demeanor. Her presence filled the space, shifting the energy of the street with the power she carried without even speaking a word. Sophie watched, feeling a sense of relief mixed with uncertainty. What would her mother do? Would this be another one of those moments where Sophie felt like she had to hide her strength to avoid confrontation? Olivia reached them. She looked at Richard for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly, and then spoke. Her voice calm but firm. "I'm Olivia Green," she began, each word deliberate and controlled. "I'm the owner of this hotel, and that car you're yelling at, it's mine too." Richard's confident posture faltered. His face drained of color as he turned toward her, the realization sinking in that he was facing the very person he had just disrespected. The smugness that had marked his demeanor seconds before vanished, replaced by a stuttered apology that was too little, too late. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't realize." Richard stammered, his voice trembling now as his pride began to crack. Olivia stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "Your behavior is unacceptable, Richard," she said, the weight of her words cutting through the air. "It's not just about one incident. It's about how people treat others based on assumptions and status." Richard, who had been so sure of his authority moments ago, now stood defenseless before Olivia. His attempt to backpedal was weak, and his voice quivered as he tried to salvage something. Anything. I didn't mean to offend you or your daughter, really." He stopped mid-sentence, realizing how ridiculous he sounded. Olivia continued, her calm voice carrying the full weight of the situation. "You've treated my daughter as if she doesn't belong here. You've disrespected her, and I can't let that slide." Her eyes locked with his, piercing through, his attempts at saving face. Richard opened his mouth to apologize again, but no words came out. His confidence had evaporated entirely. In the face of someone who owned the very place he worked for, his arrogance seemed so trivial, so fragile. Sophie, standing quietly beside her mother, stepped forward. Her hands were slightly trembling, but her voice was steady and resolute. "I didn't deserve to be treated this way," she said. "No one does." Her words hung in the air, carrying the weight of everything she had endured up until this point. The microaggressions, the assumptions, the subtle ways people like Richard had made her feel less than. It wasn't just about the car. It was about all the little things that made her feel like she didn't belong in spaces meant for people like him. Sophie's voice was quiet, but it carried the strength of someone who had been silently fighting for herself her entire life. The power. Dynamics in the situation shifted. Olivia turned back to Richard, her tone as cold as the marble floors beneath their feet. "You'll be reporting to HR first thing tomorrow. Your behavior is unacceptable," she said. "You don't get to judge people based on your assumptions, especially when you don't know who they are." Richard's face flushed with a deep shame, and he nodded quickly, realizing that no amount of apologies would repair the damage done. Olivia took Sophie's hand, her touch warm but firm. "Let's go," she said quietly, her voice offering reassurance. As mother and daughter turned to leave, the tension in the air remained palpable. The patrons of the nearby restaurant had watched the entire confrontation unfold. Some exchanged uneasy glances, while others shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing the weight of what had just occurred. Sophie, still processing the moment, felt a quiet sense of empowerment, her head held a little higher. She had not only stood up for herself but also watched her mother, a woman who had always been her strength, teach a lesson on respect, dignity, and the importance of confronting injustice. The Ear. Scene closed with Olivia and Sophie walking out of the hotel, their heads held high. The moment of reckoning for Richard, who was now left alone in his shame, would remain etched in the minds of those who had witnessed it. And as they walked away, Sophie knew that things had changed, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever felt small in the face of unjust authority. Richard's face drained of color, his usually composed expression faltering as Olivia's words hit him like a freight train. He had never expected this. The smugness that had once marked his demeanor dissolved completely, replaced by a sense of panic. His mind raced as he struggled to process the magnitude of what was happening. He had assumed that his position as the hotel manager made him untouchable, that he had the power to dictate who belonged and who didn't in this space. But now, standing before the very woman he had wronged, his authority felt like a distant memory. I didn't know. I didn't realize. Richard stammered, but his words felt weak, as if his own voice had betrayed him. Olivia stood unwavering, her gaze steady and cold. Your mistake wasn't just about insulting my daughter. It's about your assumption that because of her appearance, she didn't belong here. Her voice was calm, measured, but it carried a weight that was undeniable. And worse, you treated her like she was beneath you, simply because you assumed her worth based on the way she looked. That kind of thinking has no place in this hotel, and it has no place in this world. Richard's face turned an even deeper shade of crimson, his attempts to apologize only making things worse. He could feel the eyes of the patrons around him, their once indifferent gazes now fixed on him with judgment. The whispers started to circulate through the lobby, some in approval of Olivia's calm authority, others shocked by the extent of Richard's mistake. I'm sorry. Richard tried again, his voice now devoid of its former arrogance. I was just doing my job, trying to keep order. Olivia didn't let him finish. This is not about keeping order. This is about you using your position to enforce your biases. You assumed my daughter didn't belong here because of the way she looked, and you assumed you had the right to treat her with disrespect. You've not only insulted my daughter, but also tarnished the reputation of this hotel and what we stand for. Her words were unflinching, each one like a sharp reminder of the damage Richard had caused. The silence in the room deepened. The patrons who had been quietly watching the scene now exchanged glances, some nodding in silent approval of Olivia's words. Others stood still, waiting to see how Richard would respond to the fallout of his actions. Richard's face flushed with guilt and regret. He looked around, realizing that the damage had been done, not just to Sophie, but to his own reputation, which now hung in the balance. He tried to salvage his pride, but the realization was clear. He had underestimated both Sophie and Olivia. What he had seen as a simple misunderstanding had turned into a life-altering moment for him. Please, Richard muttered, lowering his gaze. I didn't mean to. He faltered, unable to complete the sentence. Olivia remained, composed. Your actions were more than just a mistake, she said, her tone still calm but firm. They were a reflection of how deeply ingrained biases shape our interactions every day. You've done more than harm my daughter. You've demonstrated that this hotel doesn't value the dignity of its guests. And that, she paused, letting the weight of her words settle, is something I cannot tolerate. Sophie, standing. beside her mother, felt a wave of empowerment wash over her. For the first time, she felt completely seen and heard. Her mother wasn't just standing up for her. She was challenging the systemic injustice that Sophie had quietly been fighting against her whole life. Sophie, still processing the intensity of the moment, quietly added, "I didn't deserve to be treated like that. No one does." Her words were simple but profound, carrying the weight of everything she had endured in a world that often made her feel invisible. Richard stood before them, now a shell of the man who had been so certain of his authority just moments ago. He realized that no amount of pleading or backpedaling could undo the damage. The patrons in the lobby continued to watch, some nodding in silent approval of Olivia's firm stance, while others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. Olivia turned to Richard one last time, her voice steady. "You'll be reporting to HR first thing tomorrow. Your behavior is unacceptable. You're dismissed." Richard's response was nothing but silence. The weight of his mistake hung in the air, and it was clear that nothing would be the same for him again. As Olivia and Sophie turned to leave, the crowd in the lobby seemed to exhale collectively, the tension finally breaking. Sophie, feeling her mother's strength and grace in that moment, knew that this wasn't just about the car or the hotel. It was about power dynamics, respect, and how small moments of prejudice could lead to massive shifts. As they walked out of the hotel, Sophie felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. This moment would be remembered, not just for what had happened, but for what it represented. A quiet revolution, led by two women who would not let injustice slide. The moment Olivia and Sophie walked out of the hotel, they left behind more than just an incident. They had sparked a shift in the very foundation of the establishment, and Richard's actions would reverberate through the hotel industry for years to come. Olivia's decision to fire Richard was not taken lightly, but it was necessary. The moment he had crossed the line, he had forfeited his position in her business. After a swift investigation and internal review, Richard's firing became official. The news spread quickly, reaching employees and guests alike. Richard's arrogance and prejudice, which he had so long hidden behind his status, were no longer tolerated. In the face of this exposure, he was forced to reckon with the damage his biases had caused. In the aftermath, Olivia made sure to take the necessary steps to prevent such behavior from continuing in her business. She implemented comprehensive, anti-bias training programs for all employees. The goal wasn't just to reprimand Richard, but to ensure that all staff members understood the importance of inclusivity, empathy, and respect. Olivia was determined to create a workplace culture where every guest, regardless of background or appearance, would be treated with dignity. Marcus, Sophie's father, had always known that his daughter's intelligence and grace would shine through, but today he witnessed a transformation in Sophie that even he hadn't expected. Sophie, still processing the intense events of the day, now felt empowered. She was walking with her mother out of the hotel. But she wasn't just walking out of a place. She was walking into a future where she would no longer allow anyone to diminish her worth. Sophie had always been humble, quiet, and reserved, but the events of the day had revealed something to her that she hadn't fully embraced before. Standing up for herself and others wasn't about making a scene or proving a point. It was about knowing your worth, knowing that you deserved respect, and demanding it. Sophie wasn't just a girl in a hotel lobby anymore. She was someone who had taken control of her narrative, and it felt like freedom. Olivia, too, was moved by her daughter's quiet strength. The entire experience had tested her as much as it had tested Sophie. She had faced Richard's arrogance and bias with the kind of leadership that wasn't just about authority but about holding her values firm, no matter the personal cost. Olivia understood that leadership was not simply about making decisions. It was about fostering an environment where integrity and fairness ruled. With Richard's departure, Olivia also began pushing for broader changes in the hotel. The cultural shift didn't just stop at firing one employee. She knew that deep-rooted biases existed not just in individual employees but across the entire industry. Olivia worked with industry experts to develop new policies that emphasized diversity, inclusion, and respect at every level. She ensured that all new hires and managers underwent thorough cultural sensitivity and anti-bias training. No one, from the front desk clerks to the hotel management, would ever be in a position to make assumptions about a guest again. David, Olivia's right-hand man in this endeavor, took on the responsibility of ensuring that these changes took root. He worked alongside Olivia to ensure that employees were equipped to not just manage, but actively embrace diversity in all its forms. David's dedication to creating a workplace where all guests and staff were respected and valued became the bedrock of their success. He often shared stories with his team about what had transpired with Richard, using it as an example of why inclusivity was not just a buzzword, but a core value. The hotel's transformation wasn't instantaneous, but the effects were far-reaching. It became known not just as a luxury hotel, but as a place where people could come, be themselves, and feel welcomed. Guests from all walks of life noticed the difference. The whispers of how Richard had been fired for his prejudiced behavior spread, and many came to see the hotel as a symbol of how power, when used correctly, could create real change. The moral takeaway from this experience was clear. True justice wasn't about retribution. It wasn't about getting back at someone or making them suffer for their mistakes. True justice was about empowerment, respect, and accountability. It was about creating a space where everyone, regardless of race, background, or financial status, could stand tall and be treated with dignity. The lessons of that day showed that standing up for what's right didn't always require force. It required the courage to act with integrity and the strength to hold others accountable, especially when they misused their positions of power. Intinadintiingd. The end. Olivia's actions were a reflection of what true leadership looks like. Leading by example. Creating a space where people can thrive, and standing up for what's right, no matter how difficult it might be. It was a lesson that Sophie would carry with her for the rest of her life, knowing that the world could only change if people were willing to step up and challenge the injustices they saw. As they moved forward, Olivia, Sophie, and the entire hotel would remember that moment, that day when a small act of prejudice was challenged and corrected. The world was shaped by how people stand up for each other, and that day was a testament to how a mother's love and a daughter's resilience could reshape the future. Justice isn't about silencing others, it's about giving them the freedom to be heard and shine in their own right. Have you ever witnessed someone break free from judgment and show their true strength? Share your story in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that challenge the status quo and inspire real change. Stay tuned for more stories that challenge how we view justice, equality, and the power of self-expression. You won't want to miss it.